Forms are a standard way of seeking user input. In this lesson, we will explore control forms, a way of setting up forms in your React application whereby your form information is directly tied into the state of your React component that is hosting the form. So any changes that you make to your form inputs will be immediately reflected into the state of your React component. And so the state of the form or the information in the form is always reflected in the state of the React component and can be retrieved from there. Similarly, you can also do form validation to ensure that the information being submitted is within reasonable limits. So we'll do the client-side form validation in this lesson. Let's learn a little more about control forms. As I mentioned, forms are a very standard approach for users to input data for your application. So it provides a cohesive and effective and a compelling way of inputting data into your application. And so as we see, HTML supports forms in various ways. Forms are extensively used on many websites. When you log into any website, for example, typically they will pop up a form for you where you fill in your username and password to log into a website. Maybe you are submitting some information to your website. Maybe you are submitting some feedback to a place. Maybe you are reserving a table at a restaurant. All these can be easily supported through the use of forms. Support for forms is already built into HTML. So as you realize, in HTML, you can easily create a form wherever you want in your HTML page by using the form tag. And inside the form tag, we will include various form elements. The input form element allows us to create the input boxes in the form where you can fill in information. The input type could be of the type text, password, submit, radio, button, checkbox, email, telephone number, date and time, and many more. Similarly, you have text area, which will give you a number of rows within a box, allowing you to type in a long message. You have buttons, which allow you to submit the forms, and then you have select, which gives you options from which you can select one of the options. So how do these form elements from HTML forms, how do they interact with your React application? Or in other words, how does your React application get input from the forms and then make use of it? Before we understand that part, we have to realize that every one of these form elements in HTML maintain their own state within the DOM, and then they will update it based on user input. So in a text box, for example, if you type in value, that input value that you type in will be retained in the DOM by that input box. Now, we want to be able to connect that into our React components state so that any changes to a box will be immediately reflected into the React component state. Similarly, from the state, we can set the initial value for any of these form elements. So how do we do this? This is where the use of control components in React come to our aid. So what is a control component? The control component makes the React component itself control the form that it renders. So when you include a form into the view of a React component, then you can easily tie in the React component state to the form so that it will become the single source of truth. So the form information, whatever is the state of the form, will be reflected into the state of the React component. So the form state and the component state will be matched with each other. And this kind of implementation is what is referred to as a controlled component in React. Now, with the control component, every state mutation, anytime you change any of the state, it will have to be reflected into the state of your React component. So you need appropriate handler functions that will enable change. So for example, if there is any change in a box, then that change should be immediately reflected to the state of your React component. Similarly, when the user clicks on the submit button, the submitted value should be captured inside your React component and thereafter can be processed as required by your React application. So all this requires implementation of handler functions. So how do we achieve all this? Now, this is what we will explore with an example in the exercise that follows this lecture. We will see how we can tie in the form state to the state of the component to create a control form, and then be able to take the inputs and then modify the state as the form state is being changed, modify the state of the React application, and similarly handle submission of the forms. Also, in the second exercise, we will do some form validation.